It's Jeannie
And Zane.
And we are here to do our Ask a Captain video. You guys have sent in so many wonderful questions. I hope we can get to them all. I've got a lot of notes that I'm going to be referring to, and we hope you all are well. Let's just start off by saying that.
Yes.
And thank you for being so game and taking time out of your busy schedule to sit and indulge us with all these questions.
It's my pleasure.
Good. He had no choice. Okay, so I have grouped a lot of these questions into categories because many of you had the same question or variation of the same question. So we're going to start off with kind of a logical progression, I think, of what got Zane into flying in the first place. So let me read a few of the questions, and then you can sum up your answer for this category. Okay. Sound good?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now, I have most of your names. Some of them got cut off. I'm sorry, but thank you to everyone who submitted a question. And we're going to keep it just to his flying because we have enough content here for 3 or 4 videos. So it's going to be strictly just about Captain Zane and his flying career. So Elizabeth White will start off with her question. And she says, what made you want to become a pilot? Now, let me quickly go over a couple of the other questions. Ash Contreras says she'd like to know more about your background and growing up and what led you into your career of flying. Ruth said she wants to know what made you want to fly in the first place and what did you fly at 15 years old. And if you hadn't have been a pilot, what else would you have done? And then, so let's go ahead and start with those questions.
Well, I think the interest in flying started at a very young age. My dad was interested in flying, but he was not a pilot. But he would buy me balsa wood models when I was 5 years old, 6 years old, and they were kits that came in a little plastic bag, and you put the wings together, and some of them you would upgrade with a rubber band and a propeller, and then they would progress to paper-covered wings, and so I loved the flying part from a model airplane perspective.
Did you actually get those to fly? Because I got those too, and mine always went nose down.
That was part of the fun, is figuring out how to make them fly. Sometimes it might be just a position of the wings to the fuselage or the position of the tail feathers, or depended on how you put it together. So that was part of the fun, was exploring what made them fly better. So, yeah, I did many different kit airplanes, all the way up to U-control motorized airplanes. Growing up in Montana, just a funny side story, I had a U-control airplane with an engine, and it was too cold outside and snowy to fly it, so my dad was in charge of the school gym, and he allowed me to fly this airplane inside the gym. Oh, it was noisier than ever, but I was flying it in circles. Of course, with the U-control, it's an airplane on the end of a cable, and I'm flying it around in circles, and I got a little dizzy going round and round in circles, and the airplane went straight up and crashed directly into the steel beam of the gym. It came crashing to the floor. So my model airplane that I'd put together was in a heap. Anyway, you learn from your successes and your failures, and so flying started at a very young age, and that fascination of airplanes eclipsed into my mom's cousin, who was a pilot in World War II, had his own airplane and took me up flying in his airplane when I was 9 years old. So that experience of flying was just fascinating to me. So further along, Dad was interested in maybe stimulating my interest in really flying. And he discovered that to solo a glider, you had to be 14 years old. Well, we couldn't find any glider schools, and so the next thing was powered airplanes, but you had to be 16 years old to solo a powered airplane. So anyway, I started flight lessons when I was 15 years old, and I couldn't solo until I was 16. So I actually soloed on my 16th birthday, got my driver's license the same day. So it was a monumental day for me.
What kind of plane was it?
It was a Cessna 150.
A Cessna
Yeah.
150.
Mhm.
Okay, all right. That's so cool. Has there ever been a scene in a movie involving an airplane that made you shout in frustration at the TV?
You know, most flying movies are fun to watch. Probably the one that frustrated me the most was called Flight, I believe. It was featuring Denzel Washington, who was a very good actor, and it was actually a good story. He was an airline captain who got caught up in drugs and alcohol. And one of the scenes shows their desperate attempt to recover from an engine failure or something, I can't remember now, but they take the airplane and they're flying it upside down about 100 feet off the ground, you know. Anyway,
we were at the movie theater when we watched that, and that was
totally unrealistic. Those airplanes are not certified to fly upside down at that low of an altitude, and so it was totally unrealistic, and it drove me crazy.
Yeah, and sitting next to him, I'm like, I'm sneaking looks at him like, oh, dang, this isn't going to be pretty. And he's just sitting there going, oh, God, oh, no. And if you look around the theater, you can see who was a pilot because they're just going, oh, you know. And I'm like, that's cool. Can you do that? No. Okay. Wing Gullward says, was there pressure the first time you flew a commercial plane with people on board?
You know, I started out in the commercial airline world as a flight engineer, so I wasn't actually flying. I was in the flight engineer's seat, and I was responsible for the calculations of weight and balance, speed, V1, VR, when to rotate the airplane, controlling the pressurization, the electrical system, the auxiliary power unit, the fuel system. You're basically operating the systems of the airplane and assisting the pilots. And so, you know, it was a good seat to learn from because I was able to observe the captain and first officer doing their jobs as pilots. Even though I was a certified pilot, I'd not flown that particular airplane. In this case, it was a Boeing 727. So wasn't really nervous other than normal new job nerves, you know. And every time you fly with somebody different, they might have different demands and personalities and expectations.
And your training was so good.
The training was excellent.
You know, that you get in there and you know what to do for the most part.
Yeah, the one time I can think of being maybe nervous was my first captain upgrade, which was in the Boeing 727. And when you upgrade to captain for the very first time for FAR Part 121 carrier, your check ride has to be observed by an FAA examiner on an actual live flight. So, yeah, you're a little nervous because you have passengers, you have your instructor, you have a crew, you have the FAA sitting in the jump seat behind you that's observing to make sure you do everything right. And so you're kind of putting your career, kind of putting your license out on the line with the agency that oversees to make sure that we're doing our job the right way. So I can recall being a little nervous at that.
It's the ultimate
first
test.
Yeah. But he signed me off. I did fine.
Well, yeah, 35 years later. Okay, Olivia, and we have several Olivias. So this was Olivia, no last name. What was your experience like on your first flight as a pilot? Were you nervous? Okay, so this kind of is the same as the last question. And, okay, let's take this part of it. Where were you flying to on that first flight as a flight engineer, let's say?
The first flight was in Honolulu, and I did a flight, we called it the Island Hopper. It went from Honolulu to Johnson Island, then to Majuro, then to Kosrae, then to Ponape, then to Truk, and then the island of Guam. And so this is out over the Pacific Ocean, relatively short hops. It was a long day, but it was completely a new experience flying over the ocean in an airliner with a new crew and passengers, and so yeah, it was exciting. It was really, really fun
and beautiful. I mean,
beautiful.
What a beautiful part of the world to be doing your flying. Yeah. Okay. Now we'll talk a little bit more about getting into flying in terms of education and training. And Chuck says, awesome pictures. Have you flown just domestic or worldwide? And he just answered that. It's worldwide.
Yeah.
He's been everywhere, almost. And this is a big question, so I'll ask you to kind of give it a short answer. What is your honest opinion of the airline industry today? Good question, Chuck.
The airline industry has transitioned so many times during the various decades, and deregulation occurring in 1978 probably had one of the biggest changes. But what that has created is major airlines that have survived these different transitions that we've gone through. And I think the period of COVID really challenged the airlines because all flying virtually stopped because of the COVID virus and people not being allowed to get on airplanes, particularly internationally. So now that has passed, the airlines are poised to get people back in the air again, and people want to travel, people want to go places. And so there's a big demand for crews, a big demand for pilots. And so I think it's a fabulous career to get into. It has lots of opportunities. It's one of those careers where the longer you're there, the better it gets. At least that was my experience and many of the experiences of others. So as far as the state of the industry, I think it's very robust. Airlines are buying bigger, better airplanes that do more things and go more places for people and their desire and passion to travel.
Yeah. Okay. And like I said, we'll get into the actual schooling/training part, but his question, and I'll just finish with Chuck's question, were you in the military? Yes or no? No. Okay. We'll get there. All right. Jara Salem 4, and I probably messed that up, asks, what is the hardest thing about being a pilot?
Well, I don't know that it's necessarily the hardest thing. I think probably for someone who's trying to get into the business of flying airplanes, nowadays it's the cost, it's expensive. You need to dig deep and find where your passion really lies. One young gal who is trying to make a decision as to what she wants to do, I likened it to standing in a room with multiple doors that were halfway open and having to choose which door to go through. Do you finish college? Do you get married? Do you become a doctor? Do you become a welder or a pilot? Or what career path do you take? So I think getting started is probably one of those, and there's the element of the cost involved, but you have to be passionate about it. It's not an easy journey. It's a journey that has to be pursued 100% by the applicant in order to get through the multitude of testing and training that's required.
So getting into becoming a pilot, now being a pilot, which is the question, what is the hardest thing about being a pilot?
Well, I think being a pilot is demanding mentally. It depends on what situation you put yourself in. I know some people live in other areas, and so they commute to work long distances, so sometimes that can be hard. Balance of family and job and being away from home sometimes can be challenging.
Okay. This question is for me, actually, and it asks, and it's burp, with lots of P's at the end, burp. The question is, what is it like being married to a pilot? And I would say it's wonderful, but like with any career, it depends on who the person is. If he was a jerk, being married to a pilot would suck. So, it's...
Or being married to a jerk would suck.
That's what I mean.
Yeah.
But the fact that you were a pilot would have nothing to do with that. I mean, there are good people and idiots. I shouldn't say idiots, but, less than good people in every profession. So,
well, and I think for you or for any spouse, being married to a pilot spouse, being gone, you have to be somewhat independent. You have to be able to take care of the kids or take care of the house or whatever.
And that's actually the next question by Isabel Pena. How do you balance work and family time? And that is the key. I know other pilot wives who whine and complain every time their spouse is gone. And if something goes wrong, he's gone. Well, it's Thanksgiving. He's not here. It's Christmas. He's not here. So you have to accept that and know that. Now, what I know about, this and balance is when a pilot bids his schedule for the following month, he would always ask me, what do we have going on in June that I need to bid off? Because you bid your schedule. Now, if he was a brand new pilot bidding up against, say, a senior pilot with 30 years experience, and they're bidding for the same time, same plane, basically all things being equal, he's not going to win his bid. So as he became more senior, he would win those bids because that's what seniority is all about. And so he would ask me for the days that were important to not be flying. And so that's how we kind of made it, work. And being independent, learning when something breaks, to handle it, or when your small dog, your schnauzer, eats 2 pounds of dark chocolate, and remember that? Holy Lord. Yeah, $1,300 later, hospitalization, stomach pumping, medicines to slow his heart. Poor Max. He made it, but, he's on a trip. And so I had to handle it. You just have to handle it. You need people, family, support systems, numbers to call when something bursts, or, you just make it work. And I think that's the kind of person I am. But I also know people who fall apart the minute something breaks, and their husband, or not really the wives, pilot wives, because we know pilots who are females, and we'll get into that. But anyway, so it's just really having a can-do attitude for both of us.
Yeah, I think so. And nowadays we have cell phones. Back when we first started this, there were no cell phones. I remember when beepers first came out. Oh my gosh, we had a beeper. Well, then you had to make sure you had a dime to put in the phone booth to call whoever was beeping you. But nowadays, communication with the internet and with cell phones makes that process
so
easier.
much.
At least we can talk to each other.
Yeah.
Whereas in the early years, you were gone, you know.
Yeah, yeah. He can send me a text, you know what, I'm diverted to this or that for whatever reason, and, you know. Okay. So Lala London asks several questions. We're going to pick a couple. And this is a good one. Is the age of the airplane ever a safety issue? So if there's a 20-year-old 777 versus a 2-year-old 787 on the same route, is there any reason to avoid the older plane?
You know, from a safety perspective, probably not. Airplanes are designed to fly for a long, long time, and there's very strict maintenance protocols that are carried out to make sure that they're inspected, parts are replaced, parts are repaired, in order to assure the safety of the airplane and the flights that it flies. So the age of the airplane probably is not a big factor. Sometimes the age of the airplane is going to impact the convenience factors, you know, the Wi-Fi on the airplane, the TV screens that are in the seat backs, or the Bluetooth connectivity, or these kinds of things can make a difference to the passenger's experience, you know, on the airplane. But in terms of the airplane age and the safety element, airlines are tasked with very strict maintenance protocols and have to adhere to rigid inspections. And as the airplane gets older, those inspections become more frequent and stricter. So you don't really need to worry about that element. You know, the age of the airplane is not all that important. It's more a matter of, is the airline doing its duty to make sure that the airplane is ready to fly and airworthy?
And we know several airplane mechanics in the industry, and, you know, they're just top-notch people. Okay, and she also asks, you know, do you get to choose your own routes, or do you have the same routes? And again, that goes back to you can bid what you want to fly, where you want to fly, or where you want to avoid. And that's something you decide kind of the month before. You have a cutoff date for what and where you want to fly. And as you get more senior, you win those bids.
Yeah, what the airlines do is they create what they call pairings. They're trip pairings. And a pairing, an example of a pairing would be, let's say, San Francisco to New York, and it's a 2-day trip. So you fly from San Francisco to New York, you lay over, and then you fly from New York back to San Francisco. So that's a 2-day pairing. Or it might be an international pairing that goes from San Francisco to Tokyo. Well, you leave on Monday, you cross the international date line, so you lose the day, so you don't actually arrive until Tuesday. But then you leave Wednesday morning or Wednesday afternoon, and you arrive back in San Francisco on Wednesday morning. So it becomes a 3-day trip because of that lost day. So that would be a 3-day pairing. So if you like to fly to Tokyo, then you can bid those specific city pairings on specific dates, and then you're awarded those pairings based on your seniority. So it gives you a lot of choices, you know.
And I loved it when he used to fly to Paris, because he would have a nice layover there, you know, a day, sometimes 2. And I sent him shopping. I had a list, you know, I need this, I need this, I need this. And so he comes back in the cockpit with, you know, his bags for the wife. And it was all food and spices. I didn't want stuff. Yeah, I mean,
Escherey
butter, and yeah, herbs and spices. That you had a circle of the stores that I sent him with grocery lists to. How awesome is that? I was so spoiled, but you know, that was normal. It wasn't him going out of any way to do it. This is a good question. Last question of Lala London. Do you enjoy flying as a passenger?
Well, I do enjoy flying as a passenger, primarily because flying is a great way to travel. It's a very efficient use of your time. And most of the airlines do a pretty good job of taking care of their customers. There's a lot of complaints from people about, oh, the seats are uncomfortable, and I don't necessarily disagree with that. If you have a seat in the very back of the airplane, the airlines don't always put a lazy boy recliner in the economy section of the airplane, but they're in the business of profitability and making money too. And so it's a balance.
Getting people from A to B.
Getting to A to B. Back in the day when the flights involved, say, a DC-10 that had 5 rows in the middle and 3 rows on the outside, you had to crawl over 3 people in order to just go use the lavatory at 2 o'clock in the morning, and you walked to the back, and the smoking section was from row 30 to the back of the airplane. It was much different. Thank goodness they cleaned up the insides of airplanes, and the seating is much better. But I do enjoy being a passenger, absolutely.
And sometimes he can be not critical, but things, and he'll say, this should have happened, or why isn't he turning on the AC, what is it, unit? It's hot inside while we're waiting at the jetway, and the air isn't on, or little things. He didn't flare enough when he landed. So it's the truth.
Well, as a captain, I always made my passengers, my customers, my first priority. So a lot of times policies from the airline can be for one reason, but the reality of taking care of your customers is another. And to save fuel by not turning on the auxiliary power unit that powers the air conditioning unit to cool the cabin during the boarding process sometimes can be contrary to this idea of taking care of our customers first. So as a captain, I get to make that decision, and if it's too hot, I'll turn the air conditioning on, even though it might take 100 pounds of fuel to do that. You want to take care of your customers. Take care of the people that take care of you.
Yeah, and you've always been really good at that. Okay, now we got a question on my Instagram page from Eric, our son, and Zeelan, our grandson, had a question, and here's what he wants to know.
Okay.
So this is the most important question. Eric says, Z-Man wants to know how you navigate. I would like to hear him talk about how he navigated pre-GPS when you were still allowed to smoke on airplanes. And he remembers you talking about a spy hole in the cockpit for celestial navigation purposes. And Wade, our other grandson, wants to know how he sees and avoids other airplanes. Wadesters, that's a great question.
That is a good question.
Okay.
Well, the navigation prior to GPS, we used ground-based navigation systems, a visual omni range. Basically, it's an electronic signal that is received by the airplane, and you navigate based on routes that are built based on degrees of the compass. And then those electronic beams tell you whether you're left or right of the course that you're intending to fly on. It could be an ADF, it could be a radio beacon, it could be some of the early airmail routes were used by ground markers. Literally, the pilot looking out of the open cockpit plane, flying over these giant triangle markers, pointing the way across the deserts of Oklahoma or Arizona or Montana. So GPS revolutionized navigation. Now, prior to that, using celestial navigation, of course, that goes way back to ocean-going vessels, but airplanes used sextants also. And basically, celestial navigation is using longitude, longitude being measured in time, and latitude measured in basically a mathematical calculation. But the celestial navigation basically measures the angle of the sun relative to the horizon. And we know that the sun revolves around the earth every 24 hours. And so then you can divide the earth into 360 degrees. And that time equals, 15 degrees, would be 1 hour. So basically, if you can calculate your longitude and then figure out your mathematical equation of what latitude, then you mark that on a map, then you know where you are. And then if you know where you want to go, then you can calculate that point-to-point navigation using celestial navigation.
Just so easy.
So this port that you were talking about, the sextant had actually been taken out of the airplane, and the port, it was kind of like a hole in the airplane that you'd push your sextant up through the ceiling of the airplane in order to take the readings of the celestial.
Like a periscope almost?
Kind of like a periscope, yeah. Well, they'd taken those out and the hole was still in the airplane. And so I never used that kind of navigation. We used VLF Omega, which is the long-range nav system. But back in the day when smoking was still allowed on the airplanes, so some of the captains would smoke in the cockpit. Well, they finally banned smoking from the airplane. And I remember flying with one captain, and he insisted he was still going to smoke on the airplane. So he had a tapered stick, and he'd stand up behind the flight engineer's seat, and he'd poke that tapered stick up into the hole of the ceiling that had a little orifice that would open up the hole where you used to put the sextant. And that would allow the air to suck out of the pressurized vessel. So he'd be smoking in the back, and the air would be sucked out of the airplane, and it'd suck the smoke out so people wouldn't suspect him smoking in the airplane.
As if they couldn't smell it on him,
So anyway, those are the early forms of navigation. GPS has revolutionized everything we do, from airplane navigation, to tracking our dogs and cats. To finding our set of keys. It's amazing how accurate it is and how widespread it's been used. But it's a wonderful system. It's very, very useful.
Okay, and our other grandson, Wade, had the question of how do you see and avoid other airplanes? I think that's one of the most important questions.
That is a good question.
Yeah.
The first rule is see and avoid. When you teach your students, before they make a left turn, you always look to the left and make sure that you're not turning into a potential traffic coming the opposite direction. So you look out the window, you look to see to make sure there's no traffic. In the big world of air traffic control, the air traffic controller is tasked with separation of airplanes, and they have specific standards. For instance, like on a final approach to a runway, the separation is 3 miles. The airplanes have to be 3 miles, behind each other. And then there's different categories of distance, whether it's a heavy airplane and a small airplane to avoid wake turbulence.
And then side by side, because
you have the side-by-side, different standards for that. So the air traffic controller, using his radar screen, can see the separation of the airplanes, and so he's tasked with that. Out over the water of the Atlantic or the Pacific Ocean, where you don't really have radar, Wade, that's done using reported positions. And so you have waypoints, and you cross a waypoint and you report what time you crossed it, and then they know exactly in Iceland or Scotland, the controller that's taken that information. You tell them you're flying at a specific speed, so you know when you're going to get to the next point. Well, if there's a conflicting airplane that's going to cross that same point at a similar time, then he might have to tell that airplane to slow down or speed up or take a different course. So that distance and separating of airplanes is done a little differently than in the United States and Europe, where radar is used.
Good question, Zeeland and Wade. Okay. All right, Olivia, little coyote, she says, okay, Pops, besides that Mount St. Helens eruption, what was one of your most memorable flights that you've ever been a part of? And I think there are 2 or 3 tops that you have for this one. That's a great question.
I think I was in Washington, D.C., and I had a gate agent that came up and told me that we had 2 World War II D-Day veterans who were going to, I believe it was the 70th reunion at Normandy Beach, and they were being escorted. The one gentleman was 91 years old. The other gentleman was 93.
I'm going to put a photo in and show you guys so you can see what we're talking about.
So I asked her, I said, well, fantastic. I said, where are they seated? Well, they had seats back in coach. And I said, oh my gosh, we got to get them in first class. Do we have seats in first class? And she said, yes, we do. So we brought them up to pre-board the airplane prior to general boarding. And it was just a marvelous, delightful experience to visit with these 2 gentlemen who had experienced D-Day and lived to tell about it. Brought them up into the cockpit, put them in the pilot's seats, and got pictures. Had the whole crew together, and they were just beaming with pride. Of course, we were very, very pride-filled that we were able to fly them to Paris and to be able to visit with them. Anyway, that was a very memorable experience.
And he made a beautiful PA announcement letting everybody know who they were and what they did, and it was really, really special. I wasn't on the flight, but he came home so moved. So I'm going to show you those pictures. You'll have seen them by now. And then Don and Jim.
Yeah, Don and Jim were the president, CEO, and conductor of our Sacramento Choral Society and Orchestra, and we did a tour in Austria and Croatia and Slovenia, and the first stop was Munich. The whole chorus, about I don't know, what do we have, 75 or 100 people that did this tour, and so
they were flying over early.
They were
Don and Jim.
flying over a little early to Munich, and so I decided and they were going to be going on United to Munich, and so I decided.
Let me interject real quick here. We were going to be on the tour with the chorus, but Zane's father was ill and dying, so we had to stay back. But he was able to take a flight, but we weren't able to go for the 2 weeks on the tour.
So I decided it'd be fun to be the captain for Jim and Don's flight to Munich and surprise them. So I called the captain who was originally assigned the trip and traded a trip. And so Jim and Don were in the boarding area in San Francisco, and I came down and Jeannie came down, and
we surprised them.
They were just beyond, delighted that we were going to be the captain. I was going to be the captain flying them to Munich.
So we were kind of hiding, and Zane's in the crew room doing his stuff, getting ready for the flight, and I'm texting with Jim as if I was home. And what are you doing now? He says, well, we're in the lounge because they had business first. And so I was like, okay, well, don't wait too long to get into line, and even though it's first class. Anyway, when I see them in line, they're getting ready to check in for their flight and go on board. Zane comes walking out in his uniform, and Jim and Don kind of go, that's Captain Zane. And he walks right over to them, and they didn't put 2 and 2 together that he was going to be their captain. And it was just a big scene. It was wonderful at the gate there, and then on board he took excellent care of them, and I'm going to put some photos in for you to see. It was wonderful. And your last memorable number 3 memorable flight was
my memorable, and really I'd almost put this at the top of the list, was my retirement flight. It was so special having Jeannie and the kids and grandkids on the airplane. It's very bittersweet after, flying for the airline for 36 years and all the different experiences. It was just wonderful having everyone in New York and flying back to San Francisco together. And
I have to say, it was he did his final PA, his final public announcement, and he did
Now, folks, this is your captain. Just let you know we're just a little over an hour from landing in San Francisco. It's still real nice. Currently 62 degrees, which I'm going to touch it down about 8:40. Today is a special flight for me and my family. This will be my last flight after 36 years with the airline. The saying goes, 1 mile of highway will take you 1 mile. 1 mile of runway will take you anywhere. It's been my privilege to fly people like you all over the world. The business of flying has been about people. People going on vacation, people conducting business, sometimes maybe transporting cancer victims to a treatment facility or even transporting lungs or kidneys to a recipient. Bringing troops off to their families and sometimes to their final resting place. I've been flying airplanes for more than 55 years, although those first ones were made from balsa wood and powered by a rubber band. The passion of flight is something we share with angels. Thankfully, the days and nights of flights covering millions of miles, those angels have watched over me and those in the seats behind me. My favorite angel is my wife, who is with me today. Having her and my kids, Eric and Devin, grandsons, Zealand and Wade on my flight today means the world to me. Leonardo da Vinci said, once you have tasted flight, you will forever walk the earth with your eyes turned skyward. For there you have been, there you will always long to return. I want to thank you for being part of our story today and sharing this. It's been my honor to be your captain.
Makes me want to cry just remembering it. Airplane erupted in applause, and the flight attendants were coming up because they knew where I was in first class, and they're like, I've never heard anything like that. We're all crying. And they're bringing up notes to me to give to him of just thanks and celebration. And my daughter-in-law, Devin, and I had plastered the inside of the plane, like the labs and whatnot, of his story. And so everybody, whenever you went to the bathroom, you got to see his story and his picture, and that it was his retirement flight. So it was really special. And,
it was very special.
You know, we got you stepping off out of the cockpit and then off the airplane for the very last time. Mm-hmm. So Olivia, my little coyote, those were great questions. Okay, so Jonas Tallberg asks, as a pilot flying a Boeing, how would it be different flying an Airbus, or is it even possible, and or another Boeing model? You've flown every Boeing except the 74, right?
Yeah. When you fly different types of airplanes, you have to be trained in each type. So if you flew a Boeing 737, that would require separate training versus a Boeing 757, and it would be the same for an Airbus. So in order to fly an Airbus, I could fly an Airbus, but it would require specific training. So that's true of any aircraft type. You would have to have specific training in order to fly that.
Okay, and so let's say that you're a passenger. This wasn't a question, but it's my question. And we're on an Airbus 320, 321, and they need help. Could you get up there and fly that airplane, even though it's different?
Yeah, it may not be real pretty. I might not know everything about the systems, particularly on the airplane, because sometimes designers designed airplanes differently. But the fundamentals of flight are pretty universal. So I could, for the most part, save the day if it came to that. Absolutely. Now, I think most pilots could.
So, okay, here's another question, and it just came from the top of my head. Could a passenger like me be talked into, by ATC, how to land a plane?
Yes, you could.
We're going to die. If I have to come up into that cockpit and talk to ATC and they're telling me how to do it, no.
Well, everyone would react differently. Some people would be more capable than others, but it is possible.
Okay, well, that's good to know.
Mm-hmm.
That's good to know. Okay, this whole next section, and I'm going to give it a big synopsis because we could be here for 8 hours, is the number one topic, and that is people afraid of flying. They are afraid of airplanes, being in an airplane, and particularly the turbulence. So I'm just going to, go through these real quick. Although Lori Latte, my girl, she asks, have you ever felt scared taking off or just flying in general?
I don't know that scared would be really a right word. I will say that one experience I had when I was a very young novice pilot with just a private pilot's license, I made the decision to fly with some friends across the mountains, the Rocky Mountains, into Montana, and got caught in some weather and made the decision to turn back, but these thunderclouds had started to get higher and higher and higher, and they were higher than what the airplane was able to fly. So I got caught in the weather, and I did not have an instrument rating at the time. But I kept my cool, kept the airplane straight and level, and was in control of the airplane, trying to fight off vertigo, which is basically the illusion of being in a bank turn when you're not, or being straight and level when you're not. And you have to force yourself to believe the instruments to keep the airplane straight and level. But it was kind of a scary moment being in that weather over the mountains, picking up ice on the airplane and descending, not being able to be in control and just hoping that you broke out of the weather before you hit the mountain.
Oh,
that was a pretty scary moment, and it was reflective of my lack of experience and my maybe, lack of experience led to poor judgment that took me in a situation that was beyond the capability of the airplane's performance ability. But we live to tell about it, and that kind of is one of the things that propelled me into further training. And you learn from those experiences, and it improves your judgment drastically. So that was probably the one scary moment I had actually flying.
Yeah. And these were friends from college, and, and I've heard them tell the story, and it was a real white knuckle experience.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so let's see. Is that an M? Tina Sue asked the same thing. Julie Vanderleest, same thing, same question. And Kathy Dallas, those were all the same questions. Tommy 1331, same thing. And okay, now we get into the fear of flying. And it basically is, what do you suggest for somebody who's afraid of flying? Advice for somebody who's anxious about flying? So many of you had that. I could just read lots and lots of names here. So why don't you talk about what would you say to people who are afraid of flying, and what advice would you give them to comfort them and make them a little braver?
Flying can create fear. Driving a car can create fear. Riding a horse can create fear. If you don't feel like you're in control, or if you read stories about accidents or things that have happened in different life scenarios or transportation, forms of transportation, flying is one of the safest ways to travel, surprisingly safer than train travel or boats. And you can prove anything with statistics, but you would be surprised that when you look at how many people are killed are injured, the numbers are much higher on train accidents, boating accidents, different things than they are with commercial airline travel. So the fear of flying a lot of times is just the unknown. When you get into turbulence, you don't know what is causing that turbulence versus driving on a bumpy, potholed road. Well, you know that the road is just in poor shape, and so it's going to be bumpy. Whereas you're flying along serenely, and all of a sudden the plane jolts up or down. Well, that's caused from turbulence, and turbulence comes from different air temperatures, different wind patterns, different topography of the mountains below you that disrupts the air, that creates a turbulent condition that might be momentary or it might last 2 or 3 hours. It just depends on the atmospheric conditions at the time. But there's absolutely no reason to be fearful from that, and probably the best way to deal with it is to take a deep breath, sit back, and relax, even if you have to remind yourself and kind of force yourself to do that, and take a peaceful approach to knowing that the airplane is built to withstand that turbulence.
And so much more.
Know that the pilots are trained to deal with it. And it's just kind of inconvenient. It may spill your coffee and it may keep you awake. You won't necessarily feel real comfortable, but there's nothing unsafe about it. And so I think fear is something that has to be managed in your mind. When you look at the different ways that people deal with it, people have a stiff drink, or people will take a sedative, or there's all kinds of different things that people will use in order to calm their fears and their anxiety. So I think fear starts with the mind. To overcome that fear, you need to sit back, take a deep breath, have confidence in knowing that airplanes don't crash because of turbulence. Pilots are well trained to deal with turbulence. And so there's really nothing to fear. The probably more dangerous part of your journey was actually driving to the airport, believe it or not. So I think managing your fear in your mind and just relaxing and having confidence that it's all going to be okay is a good place to start.
Trusting it and surrendering, really. It really is just surrender to your trust of the pilots in control. They know what they're doing. And I want to say, because of unexpected turbulence, you always want to keep your seatbelt on. Even if you think the flight is going smoothly, you never know when you're going to hit that pothole in the air. You'll be fine, but you don't want to, get hurt or something. So keep your seatbelt on.
That's really, really true. We have turbulence, light turbulence, moderate turbulence, severe turbulence. You don't hit severe turbulence, but very rarely. But you want to have your seatbelt on, absolutely, in case that happened. The airplane will be fine, but you not wearing a seatbelt subjects you to potential injury if you should happen to hit clear air turbulence.
So I posted a picture of you in the cockpit with, and you've done this so many times, flown through the northern lights. That's never happened with me. I don't think I've ever flown through the northern lights. And what that must be like is so awesome. And so Linda Thelenius asks, so let's see, she says, Northern Lights are the most stunning thing to experience. We go for Northern Light expeditions whenever they appear here in Stockholm. Hello up there, Linda, in Stockholm. And of course, as well as the mountains. How often do the Northern Lights appear during one of your flights?
Well, it depends on the time of year. The aurora borealis generally are more active in the wintertime in our part of the world, up through Newfoundland, Gander, those areas up in Alaska, would see a lot of them. And the magnetized particles that are flying around and being lit up, by the atmospheric gases and not getting into the scientific element of that, but they float around in the sky at different altitudes and different locations. And so being in those areas and being able to see them is just a magic light show. And it's an amazing experience that I've had many, many times, and if you haven't seen it, it's well worth it to go to an area where you can see it. So it's a special experience indeed.
I have the creakiest chairs, as you all know, so he's not used to it. Okay, these next several questions you can synopsize into one answer from Zachary Torkos, 1946 Cape Cod, and Max Power 82. No, I'm sorry, not Max Power, that's a different one. But there are others that ask this. What do you do once autopilot is engaged and you've got this long 8, 10, 12, 15, 17-hour flight? What do you do? Do you eat and talk? What do you talk about with your co-pilots? And can you just open the door mid-flight to go use the bathroom? And so, during this long flight, what do you do?
Well, a typical flight would be long. You taxi out, you take off, you climb to altitude. On a long flight, we have what we call augmented crews, where you have one additional crew member or possibly two additional crew members. So I had 3 co-pilots, or maybe 2 additional co-pilot or 1 additional co-pilot to accommodate the crew rest that might be needed on a long flight that would be over 8 hours or over 12 hours, or in some cases over 16 hours. So once you're at cruise, the autopilot is on, the airplane is navigating, and we become kind of pilots that are monitoring the flight, monitoring the systems, make sure that everything is doing what it's supposed to do. As you transition through different air traffic control areas, then you have to make a radio call or send a position report. There's various things. Yes, we do eat in the cockpit. The cockpit door is something that is highly respected and guarded, especially since September 11. So there's very strict protocols about when the cockpit door is opened. And so that transition of bringing crew meals up into the cockpit is something that's planned. And it would be the same for the crew needed to use the lavatory. But yeah, we can chat with each other. We're not allowed to listen to music or do those kinds of things or watch TV. We're tasked with monitoring the flight to make sure that things are working the way that they should. I had a flight from Guam to San Francisco one night and discovered after about 3 hours that we were losing oil quantity in one of the engines. And so we had to make some decisions based on that condition of the airplane. And so if you weren't paying attention, things could deteriorate rapidly.
And so let me just interject about that. When they fly these long distances, they always have alternate airports all along the way, even if it's over the ocean. They know how to get to their alternate airport. So they're never going to be, oh my gosh, what do we do? They know what they're going to do all along the way. They have a plan for that. And then something you didn't talk about is if you have a long 10, 12, 14, 16, 17-hour flight, which there are, your brakes, you have brakes. And so talk just a little bit about the brakes and where you go.
The new wide-body airplanes are designed with crew rest bunks, and the pilot's crew rest in the 787s are located above first class. There's a stairway, a door and stairs that go up into 2 crew rest bunks up above first class. And then there's crew rest bunks in the back of the airplane up above coach for the flight attendants. There's crew rest bunks back there. So when you have a 17-hour flight to Singapore, you don't want your pilot sitting up there for 17 hours. He's going to need to take some rest. So you have an augmented crew that sits in the cockpit while the captain and first officer go on break. So it's a plan. I found that a 5, 7, and 2 plan kind of worked out pretty well. The augmented crew would go back for the first 5 hours and take a nap, and then they would come back. We'd go back for 7 hours, or and then we'd come back up and go to work, and then the relief crew would go back and take the remaining 2. Everyone was required to be on the flight deck to top a climb, and then they would go on break, and then they had to be back in the cockpit prior to top of descent. So everybody's on board in the flight deck.
So what is top of climb and what is the start of descent? What altitude?
Well, the top of climb is your takeoff, and you climb up to the altitude that you're anticipating to fly to. So you would top of climb would be when you reach 37,000 feet or whatever your cruise altitude would be. And then they would have to be back up in the cockpit prior to descending from 37,000 down to the landing.
All right. Okay. JP says, I'm in airline training now, and I use your videos to relax after class. Awesome. So somebody asked, does Zane listen to my videos? No. Sometimes I might show him something, but no. He doesn't listen. He has to listen to me all day and all night, so no. Okay, Michael Fairbank asks, have you ever had to refuel planes mid-air, and wondered how that really worked?
Well, no. The answer to that is no, because the airlines aren't capable of aerial refueling. Only the military uses aerial refueling. It's an amazing process, but that was designed to accommodate airplanes that were on missions where they had to be in flight more than the capability of the airplane was in terms of how much fuel was on board the airplane. But the airliners that we fly today, we go to Singapore, Tokyo, these various places, non-stop, unrefueled. We carry enough fuel to get us where we want to go.
Okay. So Janina Nuber asks, in Zane's opinion, why is the job of a pilot considered as something so fascinating and interesting, whereas the job of a bus driver or train conductor is not? So can you give a rational explanation for why why it's a little more exotic and held to a lot of fascination and interest?
Well, I think flying has always been interesting to people. We need welders, we need pilots, we need bus drivers, we need plumbers, we need doctors, we need dentists. There's so many different careers that I don't take any of them for granted.
Yeah.
But I think flying takes you to more dimensions than maybe a bus driver would be. Not that that couldn't be interesting. It certainly is interesting. Could be. But there's a fascination with flying. There's certainly more training involved. There's more things that can go wrong. Doesn't mean that things can't go wrong on a bus or a taxi. It certainly could. But due to the training, due to the risk factor that is perceived anyway, I think it creates a level of fascination with people that has carried on for a long time.
I mean, you're defying gravity. You're up in the air in a big can. It's all, so, yeah. Okay, Amy Law. She is a fellow pilot wife in Ireland, and her husband is a captain. His name is Matthew. Hello, Captain Matthew. And so she asks, she says her husband has always loved the idea of being based in the USA. Has Zane ever been tempted to relocate to another country to fly from? And if so, where? Sending lots of love to you both from Amy and Matthew. Well, we send our love back to you, our fellow crew. So where, besides Guam, which he was based out of Guam, Where else would you want to fly from? And tell us about that.
You know, I've been privileged to fly all over the world, being based with a U.S.-based carrier. So I guess the thought hasn't really crossed my mind to be based in a different country. For those of you that don't know, different agencies, the European Union and the U.S. and Australia and different countries have different requirements for pilot certification standards. So sometimes it's not as easy as just going to work for a carrier in another country. You also would need to get your licenses converted to comply with that country's certification requirements. So it's not just as easy as applying for a job. There's certain regulatory requirements that go along with that. So sometimes that can be a consideration.
Okay, so where would you want to, if you could just be based out of another country, where would you want to be based out of?
I think probably Munich, Germany. How about Munich, Germany? I love the mountains, the weather, the
location,
the location of Munich, Germany.
So central, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. You know, I've heard this a lot, and so this is, I'm anxious to hear your answer. It says, John Hauser. Hi, Jeannie. Love your videos. Thank you, John. Is it true that a plane actually flies off course 95% of the time, and one of the pilot's main responsibilities is ongoing course correction? And I've heard that I think like in motivational things, that it's not just you get up and you fly and it goes, and it's always about course correction and like life. So, but in reality, what is the truth about that statement?
Well, I'm not sure the context of being off course 95% of the time. You know, it's dependent on how that's measured, but it's true that airways, or the courses that we fly in the air, are somewhat similar to a road. A car needs to stay in his lane on a specific road, and an airplane that has filed a flight plan on a specific route or across what we call the NAT tracks across the Atlantic, those are meant to be like roads in the sky to keep traffic organized. And so, yeah, the airplane does constantly correct itself on that course, because as you fly great circle routes, you know, you're constantly adjusting your heading, although it's very unnoticeable because it's just like you're flying in a straight line. But really, you're constantly making corrections as you progress along, just as you would in a car going around a curve or the different elements of the roadway. Airplanes are very similar, although they do it in different ways. So we might take a different course than's filed based on a routing that would avoid headwinds, or might avoid traffic, or might avoid a airspace restriction. There's lots of different reasons why you might take a different route.
Okay, so then let's see. You answered that you did fly a glider when you were young. That was Bean's Bakehouse. Oh, I like that name. And your favorite plane to fly, he's assuming it was the 787. Is that true?
I do like the 787. Okay. You know, I like the 737-700 also. It's a smaller, shorter fuselaged 737, but it still has the big engine, so it was like a little race car.
Oh, okay. All right. Laura Torres, you asked, is there a particular way to show appreciation to a pilot after a flight? I love that. She always tries to give a verbal thank you, but she always wonders if there's a better way. And sometimes you, depending on where you are and what kind of plane, you may not even see them. Your exit door, you may not go, you may not see them. But what would you say to that?
I think that's excellent. You know, just popping your head in the cockpit door if it's convenient. Say, hey, thanks, nice flight. Yeah, it may not elicit a huge response, but it is noticed. For the most part, nowadays, I think people forget that the reason why they buy an airline ticket is not just for the airline food. It's so they go from A to B. And the pilots are working pretty hard up there to constantly make decisions that affect the outcome of the flight, whether it's avoiding turbulence, avoiding weather, or routes that might make up a little time to try to make sure that you can try to get to your destination on time, adjusting the flight controls so that it can be a smoother flight or a smoother landing. And people forget that those guys are up there working pretty hard. The flight attendants are working pretty hard to make you comfortable. And so, yeah, those words of appreciation, I think, go a long ways to thank your crew for what they're doing. It's not just about the crew meals or the airline food.
Yeah, which can be good. Okay, Laura, that was a great question. Let's see. This is Kelsey L. asks, is there really a Mile High Club? And what happens if people get caught being frisky in the bathroom? Yuck.
I'm not sure who the president of the Mile High Club is, or if it is just a wives' tale or an organization that's organized. I really don't know the answer to it, but I'm sure there's some people that do take advantage of that. And kudos, whatever.
Whatever floats your boat, or but ooh, those bathrooms, it's like you want to get in and get out. Anyway, okay, so right. Oval Portraits asks, what's his opinion on airlines lobbying to remove co-pilots in order to solve staffing issues? I don't. Do you know anything about that?
Yeah, it goes beyond just removing co-pilots. It's that there's talk of and unmanned vehicles making pilotless airplanes. The technology is there. The UAV technology is increasing every year. Uses for the military, uses for delivering packages, all kinds of different things, and people think that maybe that will transcend into airliners flying around the world without pilots. And I think the technology is probably there, but I don't think that the public acceptance of that technology will. It certainly is never going to happen in my lifetime. The challenges of just getting driverless cars has been enormous. And to get airplanes that can fly without pilots being able to intervene if there's problems, it's a very dynamic environment that airplanes fly in. You're sitting back there and it's smooth and you're just going in a straight line, you think, but it's a very, very dynamic environment. Many, many things are happening and many things could go wrong that would need to be intervened. Nothing major. It's incredibly reliable. The system, the engines, the systems on airplanes are so well engineered. But I don't think that removing crew members is going to be widely accepted anytime soon. Especially
with passengers. I mean, my goodness, think about how many times you've had to deal with passengers. Mm-hmm. So we're going to start a new topic here. And a lot of people want to know if you were flying on September 11th. What did it feel like to be a pilot after September 11th? And so let's see if there's anything in specific. I mean, it was just Julie Vanderleest. She says, the skies were eerily quiet for days after that, and I live near an international airport under the flight path. It's never been quiet that long. And the first plane that flew over gave me heart failure, and I was only 17 years old. So basically, in a nutshell, what can you say about what you were doing on 9/11 and what it's been like since 9/11?
I wasn't flying on 9/11. I watched the airplanes hit the World Trade Centers on TV that morning in disbelief. I had just returned from London the night before, and many of my fellow crew members were flying on that day, and the whole air system shut down. Many of our airplanes went to Gander, went to Vancouver, British Columbia, Halifax, and were grounded with hundreds of other airplanes on that day. And it was very sobering, the breach of the cockpit, the violent actions that took place on that day. will never be forgotten. We will always remember that day. And things changed drastically from a security perspective. One of the things that changed was just the strengthening of cockpit doors, the protocols that are used for opening and closing cockpit doors, the security measures that have been taken to prevent that from happening again are drastically changed.
And just security, getting through security.
The security issues. I remember the morning coming to the airport, the first time that they restricted liquids on board the airplane. Well, nobody saw this coming. It came down the middle of the night. I came to the airport. There was a line outside of security, just hundreds and hundreds of feet long, because nobody knew what to do with this people's liquids that were no longer allowed on the airplane. So the agents got a bunch of garbage bags and just unloading people's liquids into garbage bags. And all the flights were delayed that day because just getting through security had changed so drastically just due to liquids.
I remember
the change of liquids.
Took my lip gloss. I had just bought a new, expensive, like $10, lip color. It's like, what am I going to do? Put bad color on someone? What can I do with this? And of course, that has now come up to the 3-ounce rule. You can carry up to 3 ounces of liquid.
Sad day, sad commentary on history, and it pretty well changed so many things in our industry.
So to lighten that up, what is your favorite plane-related movie? That was from Stephanie Oliver. One that always gives us a laugh.
Airplane was a great series. It was full of spoofiness, but really a funny movie. Yeah, there was different versions. I think the first one was the best one.
Where to, ASMR asks, is there such a thing as a traffic jam while you fly?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, they have many what they call flow controls going into the major hubs, particularly New York. There's a lot of traffic jams that occur as a result of weather, time of day. You go into the New York City area, you have LaGuardia, Newark, JFK, all these airports in close proximity. And certain times of the day, you have more airplanes trying to depart and land. And so if you get a thunderstorm in the middle of that, then they can't allow airplanes to take off because they don't want to route the airplanes into that thunderstorm. So I've been number 68 for takeoff out of Newark. 68 airplanes lined up trying to take off.
And that's just as frustrating for you as a pilot as it is for all the passengers.
Yeah, you're trying to get there on time, trying to take care of everybody, and of course it's a domino effect. If you're late, then the next flight is late, and there's a fair amount of that due to weather or different things. And airlines try to predict that. They try to build it into the schedule, and they do a pretty good job of it. But sometimes it doesn't always work out. I
think one of, the unsung heroes are some of the operations behind the scenes. When a flight is canceled or several flights are canceled, and we have hundreds, if not thousands of people stranded all over the world, getting them back, to and from. And these people are amazing, and they are truly overlooked, the people behind the scenes. And I'm not talking about the, people booking it right there, but, airplanes, getting all the flights back on schedule. And, my hat goes off to them because they make it happen. So, there are so many more people related to flying than just the pilots and the flight crew. Mm-hmm. It's a huge industry, and every job is vital to making it so that you can get from point A to point B. And sometimes things, hiccup. So, and they somehow all magically make up for it, Okay, so Marcus Skyfall asks, do you dip the nose down to avoid flying off into space? That's
It's a great question.
It's
great question.
Great. I love it.
Absolutely, I do. Now, unfortunately, most of the airplanes I've flown don't get anywhere near space. So I haven't had too much of a problem in having to dip the nose down too far, but I certainly would, because space can be dark and cold.
And maybe not up to the specs of the plane. So, okay. Let's see. Colette Greer asks, do we get to fly for free even retired? And the answer is yes, we do. However, we don't just, saunter onto a plane. It's like, hello, we are airline, employees. We get to sit here. It's based on seat availability. So if we want to go somewhere, we look at the flight. We look at the flight and see, are there seats available? The first question we ask ourselves is, do we absolutely have to be there? Is it a wedding? Is it a funeral? Is there something else we're catching? And if the answer is yes, we absolutely must be there, we buy our tickets. And yes, we get a nice little discount on some flights, not all airlines. We could, but we don't always. Sometimes we just buy a ticket, like on Southwest or whatever. But if we do see that seats are available, we can list for those seats, and we are boarded according to seniority. So if there are, let's just say, 5 seats available in first class, and we are the most senior non-revenue customers, we would get those seats. But that would be after any revenue upgrades or revenue purchases. And so there have been times where we've had to sit in the back, because we do want that flight, and it isn't imperative that we're absolutely there. So in other words, if it's sold out, which they do sometimes 15 minutes before the flight takes off, all the seats are gone because there was a misconnect on a different flight, so they put all those people on the flight we wanted, and the seats are gone. So we have to have a lot of flexibility. So that's how that works. Is there anything to add to that? I mean, yes, we do fly for free, but there have to be seats available, and domestically that can be hard. Trying to go from San Francisco to, say, Chicago or New York or whatever, there's a lot of business travel. And so we're competing with revenue customers who have priority over non-revenue customers. So if we absolutely want to be somewhere, we buy a ticket. Okay. A couple of people have asked about female pilots. Where are they? Rachel O. and somebody else asked about that. Women as pilots. And can you briefly tell us, and we know them because we're in the industry, but talk about that a little bit.
That's a great question. Being a pilot is a great career. May not be for everybody, but for women to get into the aviation industry, it's a fantastic opportunity. Unfortunately, there are probably only about 5 to 6% of the commercial airline pilots in the United States, maybe in the world, I'm not sure, that are represented in the industry. It's a pretty small percentage. I've flown with a number of female pilots, excellent pilots. The training is the same, the benefits are the same, the pay is the same, everything works off seniority. So there's no whatever glass ceiling. It's a great opportunity. There's varying reasons as to why those numbers are low. Women historically have not been encouraged to get into the industry, I think, maybe 50, 60, 70 years ago, for varying reasons, maternity leave, child rearing, taking a job away from the breadwinner of the husband of the family or whatever. There's all kinds of historical elements that were all well-founded in that. But, today's world is different, and it really is something you have to be passionate about. You have to enjoy that pursuit of an aviation career, which is can be long and expensive now, but it's a great career. It really is. And I've flown with many excellent women pilots that have chosen that career path and do a very good job. And I would recommend anyone who's interested to look into it and pursue it. It's a great career.
We're going to talk about that coming up. In a heavy, Layla with a cherry asks, in a heavy thunderstorm mid-flight, does it affect your communications?
Well, first of all, in a heavy thunderstorm, you would avoid that thunderstorm. You would not want to fly in that storm because that could affect your communication ability. In the old days when we used HF radios to communicate with it, definitely did affect our ability to communicate. Nowadays we use data links, and so it's a little easier to communicate. But yeah, the first thing with a thunderstorm, you avoid it. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. I remember one time flying from Sacramento to Houston, and as you get closer to the Gulf, you see those great big thunderheads, and we were just like sailing, around and around, and just avoiding them. Mm-hmm. Okay, let's see. So, Caitlin Riggleman says she loves this video of us when we're together. Oh. I thought it was neat to hear your husband's name is Zane. My father-in-law's name is Zane, and I don't hear that very often. Anyway, let's talk about passengers, and this is her question. Has any passenger ever had to be removed from an airplane? You see this, on the news because everybody's got a cell phone now. And let's see, Alina Teresa, Holly, Michelle, and Kate Rose Mills, they all ask about the same thing in terms of passengers, bad passengers, funny story passengers, memorable passengers, and so.
Probably one of the flights I remember is going from Houston to London one night, and about 2 hours into the flight, got a call from the lead flight attendant saying that 2 of the passengers in the back coach section had assaulted the fellow passengers around them. They were drinking their own alcohol that they'd brought with them on the airplane. They were probably inebriated before they got on the airplane. Anyway, they were very combative. Attempted to throw some punches at the flight attendants when they were asked to behave. Anyway, it escalated into this big problem. They ended up having to handcuff the 2 passengers, and we ended up making the choice to divert to Atlanta when we were on our way to London. Well, when you divert and you carry enough fuel to fly all the way to London, there's landing weight limitations. So the landing weight limitation forced us to dump 100,000 pounds of fuel in order to make the airplane weigh the right weight in order to land early in Atlanta, which we did. And we landed in Atlanta, and security came on the airplane. I'll never forget that first guy up when they opened up the door was this big Georgia cop, probably 6'10" and full uniform, and boy, he was armed and ready to go. Where are those troublemakers? Anyway, he came in and escorted those guys off the plane, and they took him down, and never really heard what happened to him. But unfortunately, it was a real inconvenience to our passengers and to the airline, because you'll never get the money back for that 100,000 pounds of fuel that you had to dump in order to meet landing weight. But there's a reason why we don't like people bringing their own alcohol on the airplanes, or at least consuming it. And bad behavior just doesn't work very well on a little aluminum tube going across the Atlantic for 10, 11 hours.
And it's, everybody's got a cell phone now, and we have a lot more, I think, entitlement and less manners than there used to be. And so you see more of it, but it doesn't happen as much as you probably see. Collectively, you might see a lot, but most flights are completely uneventful, maybe a little turbulence, and that's the way it should be.
Yep.
So when you're on a flight, use your manners, sit down, shut up, and be good. don't cause trouble. So, and then some celebrities that you've flown.
Yeah, I had Art Linkletter on my airplane one time from L.A.
Some of you might have to look him up.
The what was the show? The darndest things kids say
the darndest.
Kids say the darndest
darndest
things. I think was a show in the '60s.
We're dating ourselves. That was 100 years ago.
Joan Rivers had Joan Rivers on the airplane. Guy Fieri.
Lindsey Buckingham.
Lindsey Buckingham from Fleetwood Mac.
When he had Lindsey Buckingham, he sent me a text just telling me, and I said, well, ask him if he remembers me. Tell him I saw him in 1977. Ask if he remembers me. It was a day on the green in Oakland,
He was humored by that. I don't think he remembered her, but he was humored by that idea.
It was only one of 50,000. So he actually went back. My wife wants to know if you remember her from 1977. And so they took a selfie together and sent it to me. So
I had John F. Kennedy Jr. on the airplane, took him out to Palau.
Yeah. Okay, and we won't talk about bad celebrities. That just wouldn't be right. So now, this is going to be a very long video. But that's okay, because a lot of this is blah, blah, blah that they can just use to fall asleep and come back and listen to later. Let's talk about training and new pilots. How long is the process to become a commercial pilot? From Sean N. And if somebody is an aspiring pilot who's about to graduate high school, Timmy Parsons, what do you suggest for them to enter into the aviation field? Should he just start flying? Should he get into the field ASAP? Should he go to college? I mean, that's, personal, of course. Let's see if there's anything else to wrap in there. I mean, that's a huge question. So making a career of flying, it's a lot of people's dreams. So how do you become a commercial airline pilot?
Well, first of all, you have to learn to fly. And the first entry-level license that you would acquire in the United States is a private pilot's license. That takes 50 to 60 hours of flying and training. And that all kind of depends on you in terms of how often you take a flight lesson, how often you go to the airport to take those lessons. You could get your private pilot's license in, a month if you did it every day. But typically it's probably more like a 3 or 4 month process. People come into the airport a couple times a week.
And it's expensive.
After you get your private pilot's license and you need to accumulate some flight time, you would buy an airplane and fly it, or rent an airplane to build hours. Then your next rating or pilot license that you would want to acquire would be an instrument rating to learn how to fly in weather, and then get your commercial pilot's license. And then you could get your flight instructor rating, become a teacher, get your multi-engine rating to learn how to fly airplanes with 2 engines. And then after you acquire some time, now you have to have 1,500 hours to go to work for an airline, minimum time. So you have to kind of be a little scrappy, find jobs flying cargo or flying for a private person in their airplane, or
tours,
flight instructing, or tours, or different things. So it's a process that takes some time.
And there are schools too that you like.
Well, the schools would get you your ratings,
Mm-hmm.
So you could go to a flight school that would offer that accelerated flight training process, so that you get your instrument rating, your commercial, and all your licenses in a quicker amount of time than maybe some smaller airports that don't have as many resources. But
now, in terms of cost, it's.
Well, to get all of your ratings,
expensive.
I think on an average now it's probably close to $100,000.
Yeah. And one thing that is nice is there are some programs for the underserved areas and underserved groups of people, minorities and women as well. Or do women
Possibly.
are part of that? So,
Yeah.
really trying to offer it to as many groups of people as possible who may not be or have as easy access to it. So,
United has what they call Aviate Academy
yeah.
that they started in Goodyear, Arizona, I believe. And it's a flight school for aspiring pilots. And they're creating this flight school so that it becomes a pool of pilot applicants that will fill the seats at United Airlines. I think Delta Airlines is maybe doing the same thing, but there haven't been enough people that have been pursuing it as a career. So it's a bit of a pilot shortage to a certain extent, and they're trying to fill that shortage by creating pools of pilots that they can draw from to fill the seats when the growth period is in need of pilots, So
Yeah. So we encourage anybody, and Zane loves talking to people in that, in that step of their lives and encouraging them and giving them advice. And we're doing that. He's doing that with a young gal right now, and that's really exciting to watch her career beginning. Okay. How do you become an astronaut?
Oh my gosh. Becoming an astronaut is part of the military program. NASA is a government organization, but they draw from the military ranks primarily, unless you're a scientist. The scientists that would go up on the space shuttle missions were picked from different university programs or different things. So you can certainly be an astronaut scientist without being a pilot. But most of the astronaut programs are from the military. Now, the astronaut program is growing from Elon Musk's program to Jeff Bezos and Richard Branson. There's more private money pursuing this space exploration process. So that might open the doors to someone other than a military career person being able to become an astronaut.
And Top Gun is part of the Navy as well, right?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so that's Top Gun as well. And here's a question also asked by Bernard. Can you be a pilot if your eyes have been surgically improved?
You can. Absolutely. Not a problem. There's certain requirements for visual acuity depending on whether you hold a third class, second class, or first class medical. But
you wore glasses for the longest time.
Yeah.
And then he had his eyes done. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
Not a
so
problem.
there you go. All right. Let's see. Nico Zika, Alyssa, M.O., M. Standard, Laura North Jones, and Low Key A. Robot all want to know about your experiences with UFOs. That's an easy answer.
I don't have any experiences with UFOs. Haven't seen a UFO.
One alien here that he wakes up with every morning. Okay. Now, the last part of this. Oh, okay. Here's a great question. The investigator, would you recommend large dogs flying in cargo on long-haul flights?
The protocols for flying animals in the cargo compartment is very controlled. Back in the early days, in some of the older airplanes we have, the cargo compartments were pressurized, but sometimes the temperature controls of the older cargo compartments weren't quite as good. And if you encountered long delays on the ramp, sometimes it could impede the comfort level of the animal in the cargo compartment. We had protocols that were very strict. If we had long delays on the ramp where we literally would have to pull off the taxiway and go to our ramp area and have someone come out, open the cargo compartment and check on that particular animal. That doesn't happen too often anymore.
Yeah.
And most of the airplanes now, the newer airplanes, the environmentals of the cargo compartment are very good. They're very controlled and predictable despite the weather outside. So I wouldn't hesitate in terms of the safety of your animal. It's certainly stressful for animals to be in that environment. That's a decision that you have to make.
And your vet. Get your vet involved.
Yeah, your vet.
Depending on the length of time, too.
The process is very well thought out and very controlled, and it can be managed.
Norfast 1008 says, my 12-year-old son Jacob would like to ask, have you ever encountered any scenarios where something big or unusual hit the windshield of your plane? And did you ever have any close calls when taking off or landing? Jacob, those are great questions.
Yeah. Probably the most incidences of windshield incursions are birds. Had a few bird strikes on the window. Had one in a 727 that actually cracked the outer pane of the window.
So it can happen.
It can happen. Yeah.
And then any close calls taking off or landing?
Not too many. Had a landing in Jamaica one time where heavy rain showers were coming down, and just as we landed, the rain was so heavy that the windshield wipers just couldn't keep up with the amount of rain. So it was a little disconcerting, making sure that we kept the airplane on the center line of the runway after landing, not really being able to see very well because of this heavy rain. But it worked out just fine. Had to take a little more time before turning to make sure we identified the taxiway that we were supposed to exit the runway on.
Wow. I mean, sometimes driving it can be that way too. You just, the wipers can't keep up. Mm-hmm. Okay, Wendy Vanderboon. Medical emergencies during a flight. Do they occur, and what do you do?
The one thing I learned when I went from a smaller airplane to a bigger airplane is the number of medical emergencies increase with the number of seats that you have on the airplane. So I had an increased level of MedLink calls when I went to fly the 777, the 787, because they're just bigger airplanes. You're going to have more people on the airplane. There's going to be a higher chance that someone is going to feel dizzy or have an issue. Probably the worst case scenario, a couple of them. One person had a seizure, had to, right on rotation on takeoff, got a ding from the flight attendants, had to make a 180, go back in and land and try to get this person medical attention immediately due to a seizure. The other one was a heart attack on an airplane from Singapore to San Francisco, had to divert to Tokyo and get them medical attention right away.
So they happen, and you just have to handle it, and it's a disruption in terms of, a diversion, but
we have the ability to call MedLink. It's an organization in Arizona that has direct contact with the airplane, and they have doctors there that communicate with us and communicate with a doctor or a nurse who might happen to be on board that can assist with the person who's having the medical emergency. So that information is communicated to best give them the care that you can until you can get on the ground. And
also, very often on these flights, you hear them ask for a nurse or a doctor, and very often there's somewhere Wendy was, and so she went up and was able to help out, and they can talk to the doctors on MedLink, and having a hands-on nurse or doctor is really helpful as well, too. And so, we thank those who jump in to help. Okay, so we're going to wrap this up with a few favorites. Favorite time of the day to fly? Grunk asks that. Or day or night. What is your favorite time to fly?
I like early morning departures, just before the sun is coming up, and you take off and you see the sun coming up. It's a very peaceful time. Some of the long-haul flights I would take, you'd be coming across the Pacific Ocean from Tokyo or Singapore or Taipei in Australia, and the last hour and a half of the flight is arriving on the coast of San Francisco or the coast of California, and the sun is just coming up, and it's beautiful, it's peaceful. Yeah, those early morning hours are probably the best times.
I don't know where we were flying. One time I was sleeping and he was coming off a break or something. He comes over and wakes me up. He was going back into the cockpit. Look at the sunrise. And I'm like, I'm sleeping. Leave me alone. He appreciates them, and he takes wonderful photos with his phone sometimes when he can. Okay, favorite airport in the world to land or take off from?
There's so many. Singapore was a wonderful airport. They have centerline lights on the taxiways, and normally after you land, you have to taxi to the terminal on a specific route. Turn left on Mike, turn right on Papa, intercept Foxtrot 33 to space number 107 Bravo, or something. Well, in Singapore, they have these green lights that are controlled by the tower, and you exit the runway, and they'll say, follow the greens to F102. So they light up the pathway, the taxiway, with these green lights. And all you do is you just follow the greens. They say, follow the greens, to Zulu, or follow the greens to Delta.
How nice.
And so you just follow this lighted taxiway to where you're going to go, and it eliminates all the pilot chatter and the radio chatter.
Least favorite airport?
Maybe, oh gosh, I don't know. Most airports are pretty much all the same. Sometimes it comes down to the air traffic control system. I think Miami was always really busy. The ramp areas were kind of lumpy and bumpy in some of the areas. Never really enjoyed going into Miami. And the terminal was awful. Really old and low ceilings, and that might be better. It's been a while. Better now. It's been a while, but I never really enjoyed going to Miami that much.
Okay, that was Eris Rolls. Okay, Randy Parton. What is the most beautiful sight you've seen from the plane besides Jeannie?
When I flew out in the Pacific, the Rock Islands of Palau were probably some of the most beautiful areas to fly over. We would purposely overfly the airport and come back in around on a 30-mile final just to fly low over the Rock Islands of Palau. And if you want to know what they look like, just Google Palau, P-A-L-A-U, Rock Islands of Palau, and see some of the pictures there, and you'll understand. Beautiful. Going into Munich, going into Zurich, just on a clear, nice day, seeing the mountains of Bavaria and Austria. Fabulous.
The Alps, yeah. The Alps are just beautiful. Okay, that was Randy Parton. Jonnoy D, J-O-N-N-O-I-D. What's the most delightful and easiest European airport to fly in? That was probably then just answered with what, Munich and Zurich?
Yeah.
Okay. And L.B. Woods asked the same thing as well. And let's see. Grace E. asks, is there somewhere you haven't flown but would like to?
I've seen pictures of Kathmandu, and flying into Kathmandu, it's a pretty challenging airport, but it's located in some of the most mountainous regions of the Himalayas. And I've flown over the Himalayas on my way to India and different areas of the world, the stands, as we call it, the Kazakhstans, Pakistan, all the stands. But I think Kathmandu would be pretty interesting to go to.
That's so cool. Okay, well, put that on the bucket list then. Now, fly into as a passenger or a pilot?
Maybe a passenger, but flying there as a pilot would be pretty awesome too.
Okay. Well, this has been a long, long video, and it'll be interesting to see how this comes together. I was not able to get every single one. We'd be here for a long, long time, and I know you're busy, and we've got to get things going here. But thank you to everyone who had these questions, and maybe we'll do another part 2 someday, and I'll let you know, of course. But so how would you like to wrap this up?
Great to visit with you all. Thank you for your interest in Jeannie and Jeannie's channel and this wonderful career that I've had. I've been blessed. The technology of aviation and the things that we're able to avail ourselves to make life better, to see the world, is amazing. Travel is a gift that everyone, if you can, take advantage of, because it opens your minds, it opens your lives to new opportunities. So take advantage of flying, take advantage of travel, leave your fears at home, and enjoy the ride.
But it's just trust. Trust. Put the baggage of your fear down and just surrender and trust these guys and gals. They know what they're doing. Statistically, you're in the best hands in terms of travel. So thank you, my dear.
Thank you.
So I will sign off for now. Zane will sign off for now. And I will see you in the next video. Bye for now. Is that a tractor? Oh, it's the road thing. Okay, I'll cut that. I'll wait till it passes.